I was in this beautiful city last year, and I went home and told my wife what probably a lot of Americans that discover Krakow, I was like, this is like, Prague's sister that they didn't tell us about with fewer people. And I was thrilled. I'm definitely going to bring my family back. I also interviewed a company to help me with my product, so we're going to do some work here because I've been really impressed by the level of technology discussions and openness, especially in this city. People having a willingness to explore new ideas. I don't know how to sort of not explore new ideas. Actually, I think what I told Paul is that one of my clients asked me to wear a tie to an interview, and I said, deal breaker. Well, because I only own one, and it's really hard to find. I also, on my best days, what I try to do is just talk about what I'm doing, what we're doing at DevJam. It might not be the right thing for you. I don't know where you are in your journey, but I want to share some ideas, especially the theme of this conference very, very much fits who I am. So this is my little universe. It's called DevJam Studios. We do coaching, we do teaching, we build products, and we build products for other people. And the last two are really great for me as someone that goes into other big companies, because I see that when we're building our product, we're wrong a lot. We're wrong more than I think we're willing to kind of talk about. In fact, it was a couple of years ago, I sat with this team and they kept telling me how many points they got done, how many points they got done. And I said, how many of those points were wrong? And they looked at me and I was like, let's start tracking wrong points on your project. And some people get that, some people sort of don't, but it's to challenge you to say, just because it's done doesn't mean it's right. And I think that's kind of a nice little riff from like progress to product. Now, when I do these comparisons today, it doesn't mean I care about one and I don't care about the other. I'm going to sort of use the theme from the Agile Manifesto and kind of riff off the comparison, one over the other, but do not hear one instead of the other. So this is a little product discovery session at DevJam. And we're having the discussion that a lot of us were having during the open space. We have a little thing over here we call a frame. So we start out trying to ask people, tell me why you're doing this. What does success look like 3 to 6 months from now? A lot of our clients that are certain they want us to build something can't tell us sort of what success looks like. Then we do a little bit of work with really simple personas, and that helps us sort of talk about who. And I don't know if I can sort of draw the picture right away, but what I feel like we're doing on our best days is we're trying to make interesting product guesses. We're trying to narrow things down. That's not mutually exclusive with putting things in a backlog, but putting things in a backlog does not necessarily mean you're making product choices. Those are really different. That's one of the kind of challenges I think we need to start discussing. And then these are stories arranged in sort of a different format. They're arranged left to right in what a lot of people would call interaction design, and then they're sort of arranged top to bottom in some kind of decomposition. But that is sort of what? So we do these discovery sessions. This is a really, really interesting product. Daughter, father, they had a tragic accident in their family with kids not being able to get to a sporting event. And so they are putting together sort of a ride-share program that was based in one that you would trust your kids with someone else. So it was a really interesting sort of Kickstarter thing. Certainly people that don't have enough money to get their kids to an event might want to use a service like this, but only if they trust it. And trust is one of those really difficult things to measure. Like you can say whether an equation is right or wrong. It's much more difficult to measure whether my wife loves me or not. Definitely days when I can say that love is waning. Without measurement, I can sort of see it in her eyes and her voice and everything. And so we would call that, this collective thing we call discovery. Discovery, I mean, there's definitely aspects of it that are design. The reason I switched from the word design to discovery is because I wanted to put this idea of uncertainty in the mix. We're discovering things, and I a lot of times have felt like when the design is done, in my experience, and the really good designers always tell me, you're never done designing. You pivot, you stop for a moment. And so then it gets fed to this delivery side. So I see a lot of people using this language of sort of in discovery and delivery, but some of the slides and the presentations I see, it's still this one-way thing. And that's never, ever been the case where people have been successful. These people go over, these are what we would call a product developer at DevJam. So product developer is part software engineer and part something else, part test engineer and something else. First and foremost, they care about the product. Second, they care about maybe their skill. So a product developer is to DevJam what a guitar player is to the Rolling Stones. You know, if Keith Richards said, "Hi, I'm a guitar player," and then later you found out he was in the Rolling Stones, you'd be sort of surprised that he introduced himself as a guitar player, because he's in this band. He's part of making this thing. You still have to have the skills to play your instrument. But unless you're a soloist, you're part of the larger band. The audience doesn't come to see one person out of four. They come to see four people produce a single thing. And they're taking measurements. They're doing test-driven, continuous delivery, all the DevOps-y stuff. But we're trying to measure the impact we're having, not the progress we're making. Obviously, if you're not making any progress, it's hard to measure impact. But if you just assume that progress equals impact, you're fooling yourself. That's not true. That's where I see it with a lot of product managers. Someone has given them a burn down chart, and they haven't taken the time to understand what that means, and they assume that if it's going down linear, things are good. Whose fault that isn't really that interesting to me. It's trying to figure out how we change the discussion a little bit, because obviously it flows back here, and then we have to say, was it right? Oops. Was it right? Was it wrong? Or do we need to look at it a little bit more? Who set up the really, really cool sketch lab thing over there? Anyone in here? Who set up the sketch lab thing over there, dude?
Oh, that was done by being with us today, for medical reasons, but it was sponsored by Sabre, and the whole team of Sabre has been fantastic at making it happen.
I mean, it was so cool. So like one of my heroes in the Agile community is a guy named Ward Cunningham. Who knows who Ward Cunningham is? Everybody else should go look him up, right? Ward is the guy that gave the Agile community stories and points and velocity and continuous integration and test-driven. The guy is just like a wizard. He and I were on stage. It was Ward and I and a guy named Alan Cooper and Jeff Patton. And Jeff and Alan are design types and more than that. And they're having this really interesting discussion. They're talking about sketching. And Ward, one of the smartest programmers I know, leans over to me and says, "Hey, David, we should do some sketching tonight." And I was so humbled by that. And that's what I paraded in there, proud as more of a geek and an engineer, to try and say, I'm going to sketch even if I'm bad. I mean, I challenge any developer in this room to bravely walk up to a whiteboard and start sketching when you go back to your job. You want to start discussions that cross the chasm between tech and discovery? That's a simple way you can do it. All you have to be is willing to draw as poorly as I do. I guarantee you're not worse than this. There's your moment of credibility or courage. This is sort of where my Agile journey started. This is where I met two people who are almost my neighbors, Mary and Tom, at a conference in Italy. It was about 200 people or so. One of the things they did that I really liked, it was the second XP conference, and all the speakers they invited disagreed with them. That made me really happy. I rode in a car with a guy named David Parnas, who I should have known who it was, who said, all things can be expressed as tests. And I was like, no, everything has to be a story. This is like 2001. And Parnas turned out to be very right. A lot of what we're doing right now is to try and quantify things in automated user tests, acceptance tests, and those kind of things. And I was coming up with this idea, this great idea for this session of this talk I was going to do. And I asked Kent Beck, and he said, have you done it? And I said, no. And he said, don't talk about things you haven't done. That seemed sort of obvious to me. So after a few years, I feel like I have something I want to learn about, and I'm trying to do my best to invite other people into the discussion. So I'm curious who in this room wants to have this kind of discussion. You could set it up like this. Imagine your team, your teams are doing a good job getting things done. You'll find that one of the next questions is, are we doing the right things? And it's It's not that this is easy and this is hard, or this is easy and this is hard. It's usually that this is more discrete and this is more ambiguous. And I like those kind of comparisons because I think they start stronger conversation. So this is just some of the stuff that I'm writing about that I'm excited to talk to other people about. I like this concept of people and products over process and projects. That's kind of Agile Manifesto language, because the places where I see people are successful, sort of agile or not, this is what's happening. I like this discussion. I might start this thing called the uncertainty movement. It may turn out being a movement of one, me, then I'll be uncertain whether I should have started the uncertainty movement, and that will be recursively funny. Programmers think that's a funny joke. But I really think we need to start challenging ourselves. So we pulled some things in, Kanban, Scrum, whatever. Is it the right stuff? How do we know? How do we sort of measure that? And I know I'm not the only one here talking about it, because in the little open space we did, other people were talking about it. One of the things I sort of want to talk about today is this idea of moving to product teams, because I really sort of like that language. Now, I sort of said there would be maybe a little Scrum heresy in this talk, because I'm not sure that it really makes sense for people's goal to be the best Scrum team. To me, it matters that you're the best product team using Scrum. But if your goal is to be better at the process, the market doesn't care about the process. That is not saying that Scrum doesn't matter. It's just an evolution for us all to kind of step into. I want to talk about this, because this is one of the challenges I see. So it says, one product, one team, one product, many teams, and then many products and many teams, or because that comparison is, I think, the difficult thing. A lot of the books that I've read in the Agile space sort of assume that there's a single product and a single product owner and a single team. And when you start scaling product development, there's a whole different set of complexities that's not about delivery. It's not about measuring progress. It's like, how do you break down an idea across teams, across time, and at what point and how easy is it for you to validate that, to recompose it and say, how wrong are we? And I tend to almost always frame things as how wrong are we, because I think we're still in a space where we're overly certain that we're right. And so what I thought I'd do this week, or today, is last week and this week I spent some time in London. So I was working with a company that's a conglomerate of companies that were from Germany, England, Spain, and Italy. So I picked two of the teams I worked with that are sort of representative of these models that I'm sort of talking about. And I thought we could go through this. The opening talk sort of just made me look at my slides and say, gosh, this is a team full of guys and one woman. This is a team full of one guy and all women. Just boom. I mean, I didn't do anything. These are just the pictures I took. This is Dave's small sample set of the world. I don't know. I was wondering if this is statistically common that HR teams have. You're shaking your head, yes. Yeah, that was I don't have any evidence, but that was my feeling. And I'm trying to I thought the opening talk really did a nice job challenging us, because a lot of the language that I see used in this is always, he's going to do this, he's going to do that. Just really simple things that stop us from exploring or discovering more. So if we start with these groups, you should know that this is their CTO. And I said extreme CTO. I meant it sort of as a joke. She's a friend of mine. She and I did our first extreme programming projects together. We were so excited. We got done stuff faster and we had stronger code that we went forth, and we went from excited and we skipped over sort of like evangelist and went straight to crusading. You know, we were out there swinging our swords, taking heads. If you weren't with us, you were against us. And why did we do that? Not because either one of us are mean, probably because we're dangerously passionate, and we first saw success. We saw success, and I was like, I want that again. And I think that might be a little bit of what we need to do to evolve this Agile movement, to say, I'm happy that your first Agile, Lean, Kanban, Scrum team did pretty well. What's the next step beyond that? It's definitely already happening. I'm not the only one talking about it. So this group is sort of making this move to product. And in my little brain, the way I've been framing this for myself is kind of thinking about the last few decades. So I sort of feel like this decade was the decade of project for me. And in project land, we are overly certain. And I think we are certain, and we said, we just got to get it done. Just got to get it done. And then the hidden part of the sentence is, and then we'll be successful. And it was deep in the ideology of all the people that led those projects, a lot of the project managers, which I don't think project managers are evil. There's as many evil developers as there are evil project managers. But these people were taught something. They were taught time, scope, and budget. And that's how they were rewarded. And if you got stuff done on time, within scope, and under budget, you were given the golden prize even if you delivered a piece of junk. It was not an era of, is that a good idea? Is that a valuable project? In their defense, a lot of stuff just didn't even get done. I think that when Mary and Tom and I met, there was someone that showed some statistics for the 90s, and in most of North America, all you had to do to have your project fail was ensure the budget was over $10 million, and you would fail. Then I think there was a reaction to that. Scrum popped up, XP popped up, Mary and Tom started mapping lean ideas and techniques to software development, and we sort of entered this era where these kind of conferences started, and process was different. And I think what was good about this time frame is we were sort of less certain. And I don't think that was the language we used, but I like that. I'm not really sure. We sort of went from, but if to what if. We started exploring a little bit more. We were a little bit flat with how we did discovery because we were so quick to say, we got to not wait to build, we need to learn faster by building. And I guess I'm going to sort of make the argument that we're moving into sort of the decade of product where we need to be very uncertain. That's what I think we're missing right now. And I would draw a different triangle for today. The challenge that I see is not time, scope, and budget. The challenge is the stress between things, teams, and tech. That to me is a much more interesting challenge. If I have one small group of 6 to 8 people that all can do everything, and they're greenfielding a system in Ruby on Rails or Python and Django, and they're building one thing that's the least complex. As soon as I have a large e-commerce site with n number of teams, it's got SAP at the bottom, Java under that, and mobile and some JavaScripty solution at the top. Everybody can't do everything. So suddenly we have to figure out how do we segment products and people's skills against tech. And there's these different stressors. So I like that picture. The other thing we did with these groups before we started is we just kind of painted this continuum. And I could put waterfall here and agile here. But, that's like about as interesting as having a discussion about politics in the United States. That's not quite as funny because it's so spooky right now. But it just doesn't start much of an interesting conversation. So what I've tried to do, because it used to be, for a while it was like Scrum and Kanban. And the Scrum and the Kanban people went after each other. I once made a t-shirt that was from the 70s commercial that said, "You got your Scrum and my Kanban." Because I was like, we got to start having the discussion that helps us sort of evolve. So I'm going to give you guys different ideas. I would say, over here we're certain, over here we're uncertain. Over here things are known. Over here things are unknown. Over here things are static. Over here things are dynamic. Over here we want to learn and experiment. Over here we want to construct and build. And those are more interesting continuums like certain and uncertain, known and unknown, static and dynamic. Because one of the groups I've got to do some work with a little bit is Intel. Intel has a really cool, large coaching team, really thoughtful. What they're trying to do is not say everybody should be agile. In fact, the last time I heard, they're going to try and move the word agile out and the word entrepreneurial in. That's an interesting linguistic evolution. It's like, where do you sit? Where does your product sit? If we had more time, I would ask you to turn to the person next to you and say, how certain are you about what you need to do for the next 3 months, as an example? That would be an interesting question of how much agility you need, where you want to shift a little bit. So let's take this HR team. So they're one of these three models. This is what I drew. This is how I'm thinking about it. There's a one product, one team. That's what they are. We'll call that the first model. And then there's sort of one product and many teams. And when you go from one product to one team to one product to many teams, it doesn't matter if there's two, because twins are not twice as hard. Having twins is more than twice as hard, because parenting doesn't scale linear. It doesn't work that way. I have a 23-year-old and a 13-year-old. And one of the things I do less poorly with my youngest daughter than I did with my oldest daughter is assume I know what she's thinking. Because as soon as I do, even if I'm right, I'm wrong, because she changes her mind. She's not wrong, I'm overly structured. I'm thinking about static when she's a dynamic creature, if you will. So I'm going to call that the second model. The third one, I never know how to say, but I'm going to say many products and many teams. So using those as three vehicles, this is how I'm trying to help people learn how to scale product development, because there's not a lot of scale here as far as numbers of people. There is scale in numbers of people here. Okay, so if we just look at this first one for a little bit. So they're doing the same thing a lot of people do. They have the ability to get together and use Post-its. If not, we ended up putting the work we did into Trello. These things can go back in tools. Those aren't mutually exclusive. What you guys can't really see is that they're not focusing on scheduling right now. They're talking about context, talking about impact and context. Who are we doing what for? They're an HR team that's trying to think about the work they do as a product. And some of the work they do is not very product. It's much more like service as a product, like a physician is a product. But that's the discussion they're trying to have. So that little collection of Post-its there is not things to get done. It's an impactful user experience. Because a lot of people don't necessarily care about getting discrete things done. They want you to do something meaningful for them. That doesn't negate a story. So we sort of riffed, as a musician term, we took the Agile Manifesto, we just wrote some riffs off it. We were influenced by it. First one would be measuring impact over counting story points. And again, that doesn't mean I don't care about this. Sort of like the manifesto, I value this, I just value this more. Because I've seen too many people count points and not do the right thing. Another one would be validated learning over getting things done. And learning over commitments. Now this is one of the ones that I've seen some real damaging things happen. People are trying to get something done in a fixed time frame in the name of a sprint. They get near the end of the sprint and they start getting stuff done because the sprint is ending. Instead of getting to the end of the sprint and talking about what didn't get done and why and learning. A lot of times things don't get done has nothing to do with how hard people are working. And if you're not discovering what's helping or hindering you, then you're not learning. And fundamentally, iterations have always felt like big experiments. Planning is some hypothesis, and extreme programming, it was called a planning game for that reason. It wasn't a planning session. It was a game. I just saw in the news this morning, what's the Spanish team that just lost inside Spain? The news sportscaster was kind of saying this was supposed to be the team of teams, and they lost, even though they were the best team. They had all the right players, because sports are dynamic activities. Okay, so from too big over how big. This is an example of one I hear all the time. Tell me how big it is. The executives, a lot of executives I meet, they stroll in the room and they say, like, one question for you, when will it be done? And I would tell you, the bigger it is, the more wrong you are. Because even if you're right, the market changes your mind for you, and you're wrong even if you're right. So that sort of feels like you never win this game. You can win this game. It's too big. It's too scary. Let's break it in half. I'm a programmer, so I sort of inherently think of the world as a giant binary search algorithm, and I just start chopping things in half until they feel like, okay, I think that's a short enough cycle to learn. And this is a much deeper one. I like this idea of what's your next best investment, and I'll show you a riff off that in a little bit. Okay, so now they are using Kanban style, like flow from left to right. They have a couple columns. I've seen this pop up in a lot of places. I probably stole it, and so see if you can read this. This is, it's not ready. This is, it's ready. And sort of what it sits in between not ready and ready is, what is the impact? The last column here is not done, but validated. So we started taking some of their work and inventorying it, and we find out they had a lot of stuff done, and I said, well, was it the right thing? And nothing moved into this column, because they hadn't been doing things like we were talking about in the open space, out there showing it to people, getting people's reaction, measuring the impact. They were getting it done, which means they assumed that getting it done equaled the right thing. Now they have a lot of things going for them. Smaller team, they're not co-located, they're going to work across locations, but they get to choose to work on one thing at a time. One team, one thing. First model. Simplest, least complex. The next model up is one thing, many teams. One product, many teams. So things get a little bit more sketchy. What we're trying to do with this group is scale product development, not scale process. So that's one of the things I'm concerned about in the Agile space right now is people are conflating scaling with spreading. Scaling to me is really simple. This entire side of the room is building one product. Oh my God, how are we going to break you guys into small subset of whole teams that can come together and make decisions from a product dimension? Spreading is you're the whole company. These 8 people did really well. Everybody should do that. Let's scale Agile. And that's not scaling, that's spreading. And you shouldn't take what worked here and apply it to everyone else, because that's the same mistake we've made for years. That's the mistake I see people making. So these guys have a different structure. So I'm going to draw this picture, and I'm going to put product on this dimension. I'm going to say this is product, this is market, this is the uncertainty dimension. And this dimension down here, I'm going to call structure. Structure is in the form of process, architecture, whatever. So you have multiple teams. One way you could do it is like this. You could have teams A, B, and C. Each team has a product owner if you use a straight-up Scrum model and a team. Maybe there's one Scrum Master per team, maybe not. So what you've done is what everybody called Scrum teams, XP called them teams. I can't remember, people started calling them feature teams, but certain aspects do not go away. So one of the aspects that's cross-cutting is architecture. If they're all using some kind of complex algorithm and everybody just starts hacking at the algorithm, while I like the idea of everybody owning everything, only the people that understand the science should be banging away at the algorithm, otherwise you damage the product. So that's a classic mistake some people make. The other question I would say is, like, what product does this person own if they're on feature team A? Now this for me is a language thing. I would rather call this a product team. I would rather have product developers. The language I sort of like, which other people don't, is a producer. Each team has a producer. Your job is for your team to produce something interesting. From what I understand, that's how the microservices teams are organized at Netflix. I asked one of the Netflix people, he said, each team is 4 developers and a leader. Just simple language. That team owns one or more of those microservices. They can do whatever they want to it. They own it. It goes down, they own it. If they evolve it, they own it. But they have ownership. And I think that's also sort of one of the things we need to drive towards is one of the discussions we were having today was kind of this segmentation between designer and developer. That's why I was challenging the developers to go sketch. I mean, I could challenge the designers in the room to say, go learn a little JavaScript. Go learn some cascading style sheets. This is not that hard. Then you can start speaking each other's language. This group that we're talking about, they have a model that I think is emergent, which is more product-oriented. Because I went into a company where someone formed 40 of these teams in the name of scaling Agile. It's funny. You should all be laughing. It was arbitrary. It was accidental. It was in denial of the fact that the company where that was done, they have patents on their search algorithms. They do high-speed data replication. Everybody does not know that. So you don't have 40 SEAL teams. It's not like that. You have to figure out what your constraints are, and that's kind of a tech team constraint in that triangle I drew. This group in London is doing what I see a lot. They're going to have a platform as a product kind of model. Sitting on top of that, they have product, product, product. They're going to deliver to Norway, the Czech Republic, and another European country. When they go to do their product planning, this person, if you want to call them the product owner, does own that. They own the Norway version of the product, that dimension. But when they're thinking about the platform space, there's platform owner down here who's taking requests from these three people and saying, yes, yes, later. Sometimes you can't say no, but you can almost always say later if someone trusts you. You got to build their trust in first. No is a little bit harder to hear at times. Okay, so these guys, I'm not going to go too deep into this. I'll let you sort of read these. We also did some riffs off the Agile Manifesto. They're more programmer types, so this one says product learning over technology or over technical constraints. That doesn't mean technical constraints go away. It just means that when push comes to shove, this is more valuable than that. And so you know what that looks like in the code? You do something you're not proud of, right? And if you do it intentionally, I would say you are absorbing debt. If you do it unintentionally, you're accidentally injecting debt. Taking on debt, people that use debt as a metaphor, that think the right debt is zero, need to go take a finance class. That's not how it works. You do manage debt. It's okay to have debt unless it's anonymous, then it's problematic. Okay, so these are just, you're going to post these slides, I'm thinking? Yeah, so I just put this list in. Again, this doesn't mean I don't like epics. I just tend to use maps because I think it puts a little bit more context in place. So that's what they're doing here. This is discovery. I broke them up into sub-teams. They're going to be multiple teams. I asked them to work physically together across locations with people they didn't know. They're going through and they're building these things. These are just story maps. You can go find lots of information. Jeff Patton has written a very nice book about it. This again is who. You can't see it in this picture. There's a frame over there. It talks about why. And then, these orange things are examples. So when she's trying to do this, that would be what she's trying to do. It might look like this. That's what we call a journey. Or in this case, she does that, and that. That's a little journey. Now, nothing is mutually exclusive from this and saying, I want to learn about this story. I want to just pull this one story in. That helps me learn both in the market with like a KPI or internally to say, yes, I think we can get that done and it's of a certain quality. Someone internal, our product owner, advocating on behalf of the customer said yes, but this might be where you hit critical mass in the market. That's a mistake I think a lot of us make, getting a story done. For years I've gone to sprint reviews where you walk into the sprint review and someone says, we did this, we did this, we did this, when we did this, and I walk out and some business person says, what did we actually get done? Because the people are sort of showing them a grocery list instead of serving them a small part of the meal. This week we bought asparagus and broth and bread. Instead of, hey, here's a little snack. You go into a restaurant. A lot of restaurants, to kind of pull you in, the chef will come out and give you a small thing to nibble on. It's a little taster. This is the taste of our restaurant. That's what I think the difference is there. Okay, so in that first example, that first Model 1 example, most of the times when we're talking about Agile stuff, we're talking about this delivery cycle. So I'm just going to draw a simple picture. This is Sprint 4 and Sprint 5. And this is a metaphor that I think we need to start working on. We call that grooming. We're trying to get ready. Grooming was a very, very simple thing that we all started doing. We could have called it leveling. We're trying to get everything to be about the same size, but we assumed that smaller things were as valuable. So I tend to call this now a discovery cadence. I like that language because some of the stuff that we were talking about, discovery work that you're doing, interviews, appropriate level prototypes, trying to say, are we ready to feed this down into this delivery cadence? Okay, so with one team, you could ask yourself, in this window of time, where should we balance our investment? Is the right thing to do to get more stuff done in Sprint 4? Or is the right thing to do is say, no, we don't even know what we're really doing. We're just hacking away. We should put everybody's time into discovery. That started happening right away with a lot of really strong, confident delivery teams. We are certain we're going to get it done. maybe we should not focus on getting it done. We should put our collective energy into discovering. That's what I'm sort of trying to teach these software engineers to do. How well can you understand, how well can you absorb customer empathy? How well can you tell stories? How brave are you to talk about things that aren't discrete like programming, that are sloppy and messy and nonlinear, and like you want to wade into the product space, you have to be wrong and not know it. You can't write a test for a lot of this stuff. That's where I think it gets scary for some people. When you have multiple teams, this discovery cadence, in my experience, gets more and more essential because you have some delineation of multiple teams, and the product needs are going to be broken down across those. So if you have a story that gets fit into one team, it's sort of like this. As soon as you have a story that goes to the SAP team, goes to the Java team, and goes to the mobile team, it's a different deal. Because you're not rolling it up and validating it until all three of those groups come together. And I chose those because in my world, SAP tends to be the slowest moving thing. Sort of not necessarily right or wrong or good or bad, it just is this way slower than the mobile team. The mobile team tells me, oh, the SAP people, blah, 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 blah. We don't get paid unless they're part of the mix. To the market, our product doesn't count unless they're included when the work gets broken down across those, which my experience says maybe you should be more thoughtful about whether you feed it into that delivery cycle in the first place. Maybe you should do some more validation outside of the code. So once these guys got done, before we started doing planning, when they were going to go through, these are examples, these are maps, same kind of model, sort of left to right interactions, top to bottom decomposition. One of the questions I had them all practice asking is, what could we learn outside the code? What could we learn upstream from that delivery cadence? When it's one team and one product, you can experiment a lot faster. When it's multiple teams with different tech, building one thing, that second model, the learning is not as cheap. It's harder to roll things back if the cycle for delivering something in SAP is X, and the cycle time for delivering something with that mobile thing is 1/10 of X. X is your problem, because sometimes you can't cut that SAP stuff down. Hopefully no one's insulted by me using SAP as an example. If you're an SAP developer, I'm not saying you're bad. It's just the nature of the work is the cycle time is longer. Okay, so this group, this is Mix Panel. One of their groups in Germany, I went to interview some of the teams. The team's kind of sitting here. I said, how do you guys know, how do you measure success? And they all pointed to this monitor behind me. And I turned around, and what was on the monitor was not a Scrum burn down, but Mix Panel. Now, they're a web-based solution. This measures the impact they're having in the market. This is what I'm trying to do with more teams is say, don't pull a story in until you can guess at how you're going to measure the impact. It doesn't always work one-to-one on stories, but what it does, sort of like don't write code until you tell me how you're going to test it, is you pull in things that you pull in fewer things that are less understood because you're challenging the outcomes, not just the progress, not just the size. Okay, so I don't know, probably a lot of people here are using this. Boy, this would be a great discussion to have. Definitely in the little open space, there was people already doing this stuff. So again, I know I'm not the only one doing it. The hardest of the three, and hardest probably a poor choice of words, the most complex one is this many products thing. And so I've gone into a bunch of these ecosystems and I thought, boy, this feels wrong, but I've tried to understand the nature of what they're doing outside of how we're going to do it or any process I'm going to introduce. So this is one of the places I've been doing some work lately. Last time I was there, they were talking about how to take the medical information that they have and give it more quickly to CDC because they were trying to do that investigation around the infection that's happening, the bird-based infection that's happening in Brazil. What's it called? So that's a pretty significant context, right? And you just want a kind of throughput. But the throughput is not how fast can we get stuff done. It's how fast can we validate or invalidate the science. And they have small teams working on things. They have groups publishing content. They publish content once a month. There's no discovery. And so we sort of put this continuum. Now, they're all scientists, so it's easy to talk about experiments. Experiments on one end. Weirdly, they put product on the other end. Because so much of what they do is experimentation that they're thrilled when they get actually something that sort of feels like a product, that you can build it. Now, what's neat in my experience of working with scientists is you don't have to teach them Agile. You don't have to teach them experiments. The nature of what they're doing is assume we're mostly wrong. It's sort of like guilty until proven innocent. I got a guess. I'm going to run an experiment. Their experiments, as we were discussing in the open space, are way more controlled in more cases. We don't get to run controlled experiments. In fact, Alan Cooper and I were talking a couple weeks ago, and Alan said, I don't want to call what we do research. Instead, I want to call it field studies. I thought that was a really nice discussion because the difference between research and field studies is it's more uncertain. It's less controlled. You don't know what you don't know. Now, these groups don't have that going on, but they deliver to huge companies. This group that I work with at Reuters delivers to different states in the United States, Minnesota, Texas, Colorado, Oregon. All the states want something similar but different. They have a system. They configure the system as a product. Now, you could argue they should have a product that they sell and tell these other groups they won't do it, but that's not the nature of the market if you look at it. The word product doesn't really fit. PTC delivers to Airbus and Boeing and NASA. And it's sort of similar with all these models. And so I wrote system over product ? Because in these ecosystems, people don't tend to talk about product. Product sort of comes out in this fashion. You have capabilities or subsystems, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4. The system's decomposed in some way. And over here, this wall, this is the marketplace. And the market has these 3 customers willing to buy. But they don't want to buy off the shelf. You couldn't build and be competitive with an off-the-shelf product that satisfied all their needs. And we could argue about that. I'd be happy to have that discussion because this company needs this. And this company needs this. And this company, they're super needy. They need all that stuff. But they want similar but different. The words I hear are capabilities, configurations, and it's a tough space. We've been switched our model at DevJam. We now call ourselves product coaches. And so I thought, I want to go out and have this discussion. I'm really curious about anybody here that is working in this ecosystem. Most big telecoms are in this space. Many banks are in this space if they sell, not banks, financial companies. This is a picture that came from a friend, Ray Arel. He's one of the Intel coaches. It's a little bit better than one of my scribblings. He worked on that with Dave Snowden, if you know who that is. And so they mapped his Cynefin stuff. But I like how they sort of framed it. It's interesting to me when people that aren't working together sort of stumble into the same solution. One of my British friends said to me one time, if every place you go you find the same problem, you're the problem. This is sort of the opposite of that. Ray and I, without talking, started drawing these same continuums, little known, mostly known. Small windows, larger cycles, fast feedback, slower feedback. Do I want to learn or do I want to deliver? I think that I see this happening more and more in ecosystems. And I shared with Ron this, and I'll end this with you guys. So this is me in a very large system where there are many teams trying to figure out how to bring a group of people together to run an experiment within that system. So multi-team ecosystem, this is a Thomson Reuters thing on the table there. This back here are personas, and then there's examples of things they want to do, and then they start mapping. This is one of my favorite dudes in the picture. Look at this guy right here. He does not look happy. Right? He's not unhappy, he's uncomfortable. He's uncomfortable because discovery is not his thing. He's a technology person. He loves the tech space. So he's sitting there. We start pushing the stories around. Yeah, it's almost like I posed this, right? I promise you I did not. I was just so happy when I saw these, yeah. And so this starts happening. People start pointing. This dude is the product manager. And you know he's the product manager because he waves his hands a lot. And that's sort of part joke, but like I feel like people that are trying to describe things that aren't easy to describe in discrete words are using gestures. Oh, you go over there. No, it should be faster. No, it should move like this. It's just the nature. It speaks to the fact that stories are a good solution over requirements and specifications because they allow for a narrative as a vehicle for delivery. So they go through. This is the moment. This is exactly what I'm always looking for. Is he saying this and he's saying that. And it's this visualization. It's not... Pardon? No, he's not. Look, he's over here, man. Look, he's in the mix. Eventually, he's now interacting. I know, it's kind of like, that's what happens a lot. And it's not story mapping as magic, something from Harry Potter or something. It's just like you're starting to tell a story and more people can kind of be involved. Look at him, actively engaged. Yeah. And they map for a while, and someone says, when are we done? And you don't really know when you're done. And I do these weird heuristics with people that say, everybody come up with a number between 0 and 100. 0 says we haven't discovered. None of the landscape that we need to discover is out here. 100 says everything is out here without regard to size, because we're not sizing things. And when those numbers all get above 80, I'm like, okay, let's go talk to the teams. So now that same picture is being told, this product managers, and this is multiple teams in this situation. This is a big system. There's not 6 people and their friend. He's telling the stories. He's holding back from waving his hands right there. He's trying to contain himself. He gets to the point where one of the technology says, well, what about? And the tech guy steps up. So now I call this like product-driven architecture. Product first, architecture second. That's what I meant by product learning over technology constraints. He's the one who knows the technology constraints. And people start asking hard questions and more discovery happens. It gets sort of fed into this delivery cycle. And I'm truly very, very curious about that third model. I'm willing to talk to anyone about any of the models. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'll probably end up publishing on LeanPub. If you want to get updates or comment, if you hit this link, you'll get a little email. You can get added to the mailing list for the book. And I think there's time now or time later for questions.
We've got 8 minutes. And I think we should do questions today because you guys don't know it yet, but David has to leave us this evening. So the next couple of hours are your last chances to chat with him.
Oh, the pressure. I'm not really great at setting up questions because I don't really know how to do a big ending like ta-da, so that's the ending. Anybody have any questions, comments, curiosities?
So you've got this concept of products built from products. So when we are talking about big systems,
Yeah.
my question is, in really big systems, you can have like 200, 250 products.
Right.
And you've got somehow to coordinate, especially with big customers. I want 100 of those and 1 kilo of this one.
Right.
How you think the product management, product owners should coordinate? Because it seems like those small teams doesn't work. So.
And if you one of the things I feel like we need to do a lot more of is say, how does that happen in a product company and how does it happen in a company that has like an IT mindset? Because a product company usually already has some kind of hierarchy in place to deal with that. And even though they might be a pure product company, they're still doing customizations for someone. So there's some way to kind of talk about that. It's more like one of the places I see it is in a lot of the big telecoms. And they're doing some kind of customized work or PTC. First thing I would want to do is how do they do it today? Because a lot of times people have a system that's sort of doable today, and I sort of believe you can only change so much at any one time. So I don't want to just say, what you're doing is wrong, here's the way to go. The other thing that I tend to do is kind of like try and come up with some kind of a frame. So pick a horizon for a system and say, I don't know what it is, 3, 6, once it gets to be more than 12 months, it sort of feels kind of absurd. And then just do some kind of a funnel that talks about like, why are we doing what we're doing? Who are we doing it for? And what are their needs? And then start mapping that to teams and such. But that's more of trying to apply a product ideology in a window of time for a system where you're going to build multiple configurations. I mean, if you want to chat about it, I'm really curious because I see it done poorly more than done well. or accidentally, which really scares me.
We have some story mapping workshops, and during those workshops, those kind of impact analysis. And after this workshop, we realized that we made some mistakes, some assumptions were wrong. And then we wanted to come back to the story mapping and change it, but the map was gone. Do you have any practices, any traceability to those tools?
Okay, so just in full disclosure, I did not pay her anything. Okay? I mean, so, yeah, I got an idea. Later, I can prove an affidavit that says we don't know each other. I think it's even more difficult than that. I think it's really hard to preserve stuff on a board. What's nice about Post-its on a wall is you can annotate like crazy. You can just do such free-form discovery. But when there's multiple teams, it's going to go back into a tool. One of the tools a lot of maps go back into is Jira, and Jira doesn't really have a cross-team roll-up. They have this Jira portfolio thing right now, and it's sort of problematic because I meet a lot of product management groups that don't know what's going on with their product. They can see what's happening with teams, so we tried to do something that was sort of product first, so that this is an example of how we would visualize a journey in the product, and it's sort of like Google Maps, so it's where do you want to go? And then, how long will it take to get there? And sort of how far are you on your trip? So we're trying to, when we plug this into Jira, we've kind of have this language of like, this is what we hold and this is what we show. So in Jira, we let Jira and tools, whatever tool, hold teams and time and things, and we show sort of relationships like this. It's sort of emergent. This is what the Krakow developers are going to work on with us. Because I don't think there's a lot of tools out there that help product managers connect to delivery teams. Yep. And then we started put in some funny annotations so you can say, that's totally lame, this is confusing, and this one needs discussion. And those are kind of sweet because when you zoom way out, I'm sure it's hard for you to see in the back, but you can quickly scan you can see this is a very large map and say, oh, we're not really done here. I don't think these are even ready to start sizing. Mm-hmm. Other questions?
Maybe one more.
All the way in the back.
I guess my question is about what the product really is in your definition, because you can say that one microservice and an example you have is a product, and then you end up with one team, many products, right? And you did not cover how to handle such case.
Yeah, I didn't go into it because it would have been hard to do that. So I've thought about this a lot. I think your product is the thing that you produce that impacts other people. So in Netflix's example, those small teams own a microservice. That microservice impacts other teams at Netflix and you as the customer if you're using Netflix to stream video. If it's a single team, a product, then it's more obvious. But when it turns into that product as a platform model, the platform group, what they produce to those product teams, those are the people they impact, but they also impact the market. And the product teams are sort of dependent on them. And I think that's what's difficult about being a platform owner is it's not a simple model. You have to synthesize across those requests, and those people can really bias you and influence you and try to figure out who you can trust and what evidence they have that what they're saying, I need, is actually what they need or how soon they need it. It's a really good question. Dude asked a question. Tragically, I am the founder of this product and the product manager, so I didn't even give you the name. But that gives me like a sort of a C- as a score, right? It's called Cardboard It. So you can just fire up a free trial. Okay? All right, I hope the rest of your conference is awesome. Big hand for the dude who organized things.
Thank you very much.